This is Growing Without Schooling with Pat Faranga, and today my guest is Cevin Soling, a Harvard-educated filmmaker, musician, and author who believes it's time to abolish compulsory education in the U.S. Despite his own success, Soling says it happened in spite of school, not because of it. In his controversial book, The Student Resistance Handbook, and his acclaimed documentary, The War on Kids, he argues that schools violate children's civil rights, fuel anxiety and depression, and fail to prepare students for life. Schools are more like prisons than places of learning, he says. They crush creativity, breed bullying, and demand obedience over critical thought. Soling calls on students to resist through legal nonviolent means that disrupt school operations and challenge the system from within. Now, Cevin is a friend of mine, and we occasionally work together on education events, so I'm not an unbiased interviewer. However, I hope our connection will make this a more interesting discussion. Cevin, welcome to Growing Without Schooling.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you having me. It's been, been a while that we've, worked together and discussed education stuff. So it's nice to
Great.
have the opportunity to participate in some of the work that you do.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you're here. So let's start with The War on Kids, which you wrote and directed this documentary film in 2009. And I've seen it three times now. And the third time I watched it was recently prepping for this. And I'm just shocked at like how little has changed from the time you, the critiques that you present in this, and from all the experts and stuff that you interview in the movie on top of it all. But The War on Kids compares American public schools to prisons. The oppressive environment that students are subjected to in most schools is coupled with brutal responses to any transgression, and the response includes drugging children. Now, you are a very highly educated person, Cevin, with advanced degrees from prestigious universities. You seem to enjoy school, yet you are unrelenting in your critique of school. Why?
Well, there's a difference between school and compulsory schooling, but I would say, I just want to push back slightly on the first thing you said. I do think that there's been some difference since the film came out. I think it has contributed to this dialogue where people are more willing to be a lot more critical of school, and there certainly has been a development of and greater popularity to alternatives. So I would say that. But going back to your question. I think there's a distinct difference between compulsory schooling, which is where you're forced to be in an environment against your will and subjected to everything that takes place within the institution under threat of consequences from the law, as opposed to being in an environment where there might be some things that you oppose, but you're there voluntarily and you can leave at any time if you don't accept the rules of the environment that you're in. And that one feature makes all the difference. I don't think if someone wants to voluntarily be in a compulsory, well, I guess it wouldn't be compulsory, but in a school,
Yeah.
in what is traditionally a compulsory school, their experience will be different, knowing that they have the agency to leave at any time
Mhm.
if things get too bad in various ways.
Mhm.
And to a certain degree, that's what the Student Resistance Handbook is about. It's really so much about schooling, and this is one of the things. When I went, one of the degrees that I got was in education. One of the it's amazing how there was something way back in astronomy where there was a long held belief in the geocentric model that the planets and the sun all revolved around the Earth, and so uh, um, observation of the planets didn't form, create this circular path. So they had to create things like epicycles to explain how when the Earth is traveling and passing a planet, it looks like the planet is temporarily going backwards. So they had to create all these crazy models. Well, this is what ed school is like, because they bought into the compulsory schooling model, but they uh, so their capacity to be critical and their was profoundly diminished, and they also adopted this faith in reform, and just weren't able to appreciate so many of the deficiencies of the institution, and so they would twist themselves in ways. But one of the great problems that they refused to comprehend or accept was why there's a performance gap in education for wealthier, students from wealthier families. Like money just automatically, will change your SAT scores if you give someone money, and they, and so they can come up with all sorts of ways to twist themselves and come up with it. But what it really comes down to is the success in school is contingent on coping mechanisms, and the less money one has in a household, typically or commonly, but not always, there's going to be greater stress in that environment that makes it that much harder to cope with the stress in the school environment.
Right.
And if you are in denial that school is a stressful environment, you will never come to this obvious realization.
Right. Yes.
You
Right. I know. I mean, that's always been the issue. It's like we have gone through school. Our parents went through school, and so that's the norm. And so you Mom, Dad, I don't want to go to school. And it's like, no, that's what everybody does. You got to go to school.
know,
And then people like you and I are coming out and saying, well, maybe not. There are other ways to do this. Um, Now, there in the war on kids, and we're going to talk about student resistance soon, but
no,
there are many powerful images and videos in the film of real life incidents of children. Like there was this one incident where a high school, I think it was a high school. Actually, I wrote the name down. The Stratford School. The police thought that in South Carolina, the superintendent or the principal, I think it was the principal, thought that there was marijuana in the school. So he ordered a SWAT team to come in, and the video shows these like 117 students on the floor with dogs sniffing their bodies. Then they're all going through and they never found any marijuana. But the kids were subjected to this, and it was, and it's just, that's it, typical day, you know.
but even if they had found, one or two or three students
Yeah.
had marijuana, it's like, do our democratic institution was created so that you need a search warrant. You only search the students
Mhm.
that are
Mhm.
suspected. This is all about breaking all of the democratic norms that we've established, and that's a whole other fundamental problem with schooling. It's just how what an assault it is on our democratic principles, and this is the toxic
Mhm.
environment that we've allowed children to grow up in, and
Mhm.
and that actually reflects an even broader and deeper problem of compulsory schooling, and that is that compulsory schooling it's not just about what it does to kids. It trains
Mhm.
adults to disregard students, to disregard their emotional needs and
Mhm.
their intellectual needs as well. But people assume, oh, you don't like school, there's something wrong with you. You're lazy. You have something, that
Mhm.
there's some, why should your preferences matter as far as you don't want to do homework? You've been in school all day. Now you have to do, this additional work, and and then that also leads to the drugging of kids. Well, you're not
Mhm.
liking school. Here's a pill you can take, and you won't be as upset about being in this environment. So
Right.
it's really it's not just what schools do to kids. It's the way that it makes adults uh, not listen to the fundamental basic needs of kids, and
Mhm.
subject them to uh, an environment that they should not be. No one should be subjected to.
Was there a particular incident? I mean, you cite so many in the movie, but was there a particular incident that made you decide to pursue this? Was there something in your life that said, this is unjust. I got to deal with this?
Um, so it's funny. So anytime I'm at a screening of the film, or I'm invited to show the film, I always get, people always come up after me, and they either, they either tell some horror story of something that happened to them in school, where they saw some horrible, and where they experienced some horrible injustice that they were powerless to do anything about,
Mhm.
or they witnessed someone else experience something, and they didn't have the capacity to intervene as a child, but they knew this was wrong, and they saw, an otherwise, good person crushed and reduced to tears, or worse, horrible things happen. For me, I I I just found the whole experience degrading and humiliating. And I just had a heightened sense of dignity. I guess, a lot of my classmates, didn't necessarily object, to the conditions. They just kind of, well, this is what it is.
Mhm.
Um, and I didn't. There was a great deal of frustration, and the indignity of the environment, of being told what to do by people who really, who clearly didn't understand
Right.
why they were there, and it was a job, and even the ones that were well-meaning. Well, I mean, that was part of it, and that carried through for a long time with college too. Was I refused to have any kind of relationship, any type of um, supportive, or develop any kind of connection with any of my teachers, because the construct was such that at the end of the day, these people were always grading me. These, and
Mhm.
they didn't and if they weren't going to abdicate that power, that at any time, for any reason, for any whim, uh, they at the end of the day had authority over me, and the authority was only established by virtue of the environment, and it wasn't any kind of organic respect for their, if I studied martial arts, and there's a respect one has for the sensei, and that's a well-earned respect, and it's within the dojo, and you voluntarily adhere to these rules, but you do so because this person who's training you, teaching you, clearly has skills that you don't. And yes, a teacher, an educator, has certain skills when it comes to whatever they're teaching you. Presumably, if you're in a bio class, they're going to know, more about biology than you. But that only extends to biology. That doesn't mean they have their authority should extend to sit down, shut up, don't talk to your friends, and
Mhm.
all these other things that are, tragically in some ways necessary to the environment, but not conducive to learning, and not conducive uh, to one's dignity.
Yeah, yeah. Now, many of the I was really surprised the first time I saw the film. Many of the teachers that you interview in the film, particularly John Taylor Gatto, note that school largely serves to be a social control mechanism rather than a sincere effort to teach each child how to learn what they need to learn or want to learn. So children are subject to a as I think Gatto put it, psychological indoctrination to obey orders. Or here's what he said: schools infantilize students into the mass mind. Can you explain the process these teachers are describing?
Um, so I think, if Gato were still alive, I want him to,
Yeah.
to detail his um, his assertive statement. But, I come at it from a slight, from different angles.
Hmm.
Gatto is brilliant, and he was, one of the greatest minds of people who are able to be critical of education. I kind of break things down in different ways, and one is schools. Uh, Schools are fundamentally they're an intervention, and they're thereby an experiment. And
Mhm.
the experimental hypothesis is that if you force a child to go to school 7 hours a day, 5 days a week, 9 months, 5 to 10 months a year for 12 years, then something good will happen.
Right.
And schools do not define what that something good is. There's some things that are implied though.
Mhm.
And the problem with the things that are implied is that they don't really coexist. One is that they'll develop literacy and other tools for self-actualization. Another is that they'll develop schools for the workplace, and another is that they'll develop democratic values and knowledge of the rights of obligations of citizenship. That's not so much something that's advertised now, but in the 50s, that was certainly something that a parent would expect their child to learn. The kids would pledge allegiance to the flag every day, uh, and theoretically learn those things. So I'd say that's not only has that become disregarded, that's certainly spat upon, and it's spat upon because and this is one thing I looked up the Third Geneva Convention, which is the what things are considered war crimes. Well, the
Mhm.
amazing thing is that if students were labeled enemy combatants and they were sent to an enemy combatants, if we took anyone from who's at Guantanamo Bay and we placed them in a compulsory school, uh, we would be found guilty of violating about 10 different articles of the Geneva Convention, which govern
Mhm.
things like discipline, labor demands, the care of their personal effects, general health and well-being, diet, and exposure to humiliation. These are all things
Mhm.
that enemy combatants are protected of. So schools would be deemed, would conditions be considered war crimes. That and the students' constitutional rights are routinely violated. Their First Amendment rights are profoundly diminished. Search and seizures, due process, all these different constitutional rights are violated in school. The Fifth Amendment right not to testify against oneself. Um, so democratic values and they're trained and they grow up in this environment, so they have limited expectations for all these, and they also come to, we know from surveys of kids that they come to expect government review and even I think there was some study survey was over, it's about 51% thought that the government should be required to review uh, um, uh, reporters, before they publish stories in the media. This was, done about 15 years ago. I know it's probably worse today what the numbers are. And there was a large percentage that was I don't know. So it wasn't like 49% were saying no, that shouldn't be the case. But so this and then literacy, we know from studies as far as how ineffective schools are with literacy. Uh, Only 13% of adults are considered proficient in literary skills. Now, proficient, conceitedly is the highest level, but it's not
Mhm.
all that demanding to be proficient. Uh, so it's not that 80% are illiterate. It's just, as far as having skills necessary to perform, more complex and challenging, literary activities is
Mhm.
proficient. So it's,
Right.
slightly higher bar, but not one, when you've gone through 12 years of schooling. So, and then it's, that with math, it's similarly, bad as far as what the rates are.
Mhm.
And then certainly they're not, if you start breaking down the curriculum, you're the things necessary for work, are not. If that were, you'd go to a apprentice school or of some
Right.
kind.
Yeah.
So there are certainly schools that teach work skills, and I think those are certainly fine for
Mhm.
in many instances. Depending again on how they're how the skills are introduced and whether they're voluntary, but yeah, so some people are just attracted to different things, dance or arts or something at an early age, and
Mhm.
or even some a lot of practical skills, and that's that's fine if for many people.
Mhm. So you have a great story about John Gatto when you went to interview him for the movie. Would you mind relating that to the audience? I'd like people to know about his personality a bit.
Oh, sure. So this was pretty funny. Yeah, without being reminded of, I would have forgotten it. But I had a pretty small film crew. It was just myself, a person who did camera, and a person who did lighting and sound. And this was an outdoor interview for Gatto, and so it was just sound. So someone to hold the boom mic and adjust the level. So the three of us drive, and he's living in this very rural area of New York. I mean, to go on some twisted roads in the middle of New York. And yeah, I grew up in New York, but this was a part of New York I'd never been to before. Uh, and we get there, and there's a lot of grounds, and Gatto sees us, and we're kind of looking around, and I don't know if you've ever seen the Prisoner,
Mhm.
the TV series,
Right,
and
with the white balls
early stuff.
capturing.
Yeah, so he's got this giant ball that looks like the ball from the red ball from the prisoner that bounces around and prevents anyone from escaping the island that they're on. But anyway, so we're kind of looking around, and Gatto warmly greets us, and he tells us, the three of us, come on, get in my truck, and we all hop into his truck, and he, starts giving us a tour of his grounds, and he's
It's
driving pretty
garlic
fast.
form, right?
Not, it's not a road. I mean, it's a dirt, road. So we're bouncing, and the cameraman, and it's literally hitting the ceiling of the car. I'm in the back with the person who's doing the sound, and we're just sort of gripping and trying to hold ourselves, and we're bouncing like crazy. And then he gets to this pond on his property, and he says, "Do you think we can make it through?" We're like, I don't know, we're gonna. He goes, well, then he drives in, and the water comes all the way up to just barely below the windows.
Oh.
And he's driving through, and we're like, I don't know, we have no idea how deep it is or what's going to happen, and fortunately, obviously, we make it through, and water did not enter the vehicle, but it was only a few inches from possibly doing that. And after he finishes, circling and drives us around, and he gets back to the front where his house is. He turns to us and he goes, "So who are you, and what the hell are you doing here?" We
Uh,
scheduled an interview with you.
You're such a character. I have my own stories, but we'll save that for another time. So yeah, 6 years. So then so you got involved. The movie goes out. It was well reviewed, well acclaimed. Um, but then 6 years later, you wrote the Student Resistance Handbook. And this is essentially a call to action. I mean, it's almost like the first movie just lays out the problem, and then you say, here's the only way you can fight this problem, or one of the ways, not the only way. You can fight this problem, and that's resistance. And the book opens with the mission of this handbook is to provide students with information about civil disobedience that can be used to disrupt the function of public schools with the ultimate goal of making them untenable. Therefore, thereby forcing them to either change how they treat students or go out of business. This is to be achieved by non-violent forms of resistance and protest. This kind of resistance involves public statements, symbolic displays, systemic disruption, resistance and non-cooperation, overload the system, and target individuals who engage in student oppression. Now, The first time I read this, I thought you might get attacked for putting bad ideas into young children's heads. What do you say to people who are aghast at you giving students advice on how to mess up school?
Um, well, it comes down to breaking down the fact that I think first one has to really understand the nature of compulsory schooling, and when you understand that, then the next part is the logical conclusion. I think as I'm a parent myself, and if I just think even forgetting school, if I think what are the traits and characteristics that I think that I'd like my children to adopt,
Mhm.
and I'd like them to be, I mean, first and foremost, I'd like them to be empathetic, good-hearted people.
Mhm.
I'd like them to be intellectually curious. I'd like
Mhm.
them to be creative and confident,
Mhm.
articulate and literate, um, self-reliant, rational, which might be a much
Okay,
if
okay.
you're a parent. And then the question is, well, do you think sending kids to an institutionalized environment, to schooling is the best way to achieve these goals? And
Hey.
are these even the goals of the institution itself? And
Uh-huh.
or is this environment conducive to any of these?
Right.
And the answer is so clearly no. We see children, because the environment is so abusive. Children are taught to hate learning,
Right.
and this is one of those things that people always blame on kids. They as I discussed before, they experience what is essentially a fascist environment where they're
Mhm.
you know they're have no experience with democratic principles or freedoms.
Mhm.
Um, Adolescence itself is pathologized.
Right.
Uh, all of all of their basic behavior and needs to not sit
Mhm.
down
Right.
and be lectured to. There's already some resistance that takes place that is hardwired, and that is forgetting.
Mhm.
This
Mhm.
this was something, a realization that I came to, sort of mind that blows my mind. It's just how many people can't remember what they learned in school. In the war on kids, you said I learned a foreign language spent 5 years learning Spanish, or
Right.
I can't
Right.
speak a word of Spanish. And it's like, well, it's not that you couldn't. It's that you willfully, I would argue,
Huh. No,
forgot
you're
what
right.
you learned.
I hated
you
going to
know
Spanish class.
you willfully forgot, or subconsciously forgot, because you
Yeah.
associate what you learned with the environment. In a different kind of
Mhm.
environment, I contend that your retention would be that would be superior.
Mhm.
Obedience to authority um, is the number one message in school, and that is because the environment is such that it cannot function, because it's founded on efficiency. The reason why we have schools is the factory mass education. You need to have everyone come through, as opposed to the individual attention,
Mhm.
of one person, one parent, one guardian, one whatever guiding a student's interests. You have this mass environment, that's this factory model of education, and unless everyone is sitting down, shutting up, and eyes forward, this model doesn't work. So you have to have obedience to authority. You have to have the kids line up, walk to the art class. Shut up, don't talk, don't tell your friends. Walk to art class, get
Mhm.
there at 8:15, get to gym at 9, get to whatever it is. Shut up, stand in line, walk to the classes for the elementary school. You have limited time. You need a hall pass if you're in high school, but so there's greater liberty to control, regulate oneself, but the punishment is the same either way. So, and that obedience to authority it manifests itself in ways, because people will say, well, I'm not obedient. Look at the protests that are taking place. These people go through the system. Well, the obedience to authority we see from Milgram isn't necessarily explicit obedience in that sort of way. It manifests itself in a diminishment of empathy, and it comes out in other ways as far as adherence to authority in other ways. Some of the worst, consequences, is the neurosis, the anxiety and depression, and you look at the high rates of this, and this is, the initial place where they get it, where they don't feel their self-worth is dependent on the grading of others, and just that environment and in all sorts of ways makes you. I mean, the PTSD that is a consequence, the worst recurring nightmares that and I'm dying for there to be a study on this, and I got challenged. Well, where's the study on PTSD? Well, there's sufficient evidence, that the recurring nightmares that people still have,
being called to the principal's office, and
they didn't, they failed. And one of my favorite scenes in a movie, a comedy, was Val Kilmer was in this criminally appreciated movie called Top Secret, where he's in a prison. His character was sort of this it's kind of like this Elvis movie. He plays this crooner, Elvis type crooner, who's from the United States visiting this Eastern Bloc country, and he ends up in some intrigue, and he's imprisoned in this basically East German type prison cell, and he's being whipped and beaten, not in a the depiction isn't graphic because it's a comedy, but he's chained up, and while he's being whipped by this hunchback and stuff, he starts falling, fading out, and has this dream that he's back in school, and he shows up, and he's just missed the final exams, and he can't believe that he showed up because the kids are leaving class. He's like, oh, I can't believe I failed the entire, and then he comes out of this hallucination, and he sees himself being whipped and beaten. He goes, oh, it was just a dream. So there's that relief.
Right. I'd rather be here.
But how common this anxiety dream is, that it carries along into adulthood, is clearly evidence of PTSD. But now you have people who just, it's common to be under surveillance in schools, so they accept, that they're under surveillance. The alienation from, I mean, this is sort of crucial, I guess, for the factory model of schooling, where you're training people to be in a factory, but just that the work people produce in schools is so meaningless to them, and meaningless to everyone, because the point isn't what you create. It's, theoretically, that you're learning these skills, but your output is meaningless beyond the capacity to give it a number or a grade. It has no use. You can throw it out once you've gotten your grade. You haven't created anything, produced anything of meaning. And so you learn to produce things that have no meaning. It's part of the training. You learned helplessness, and diminished empathy. I think I've addressed. So this is the environment, and the things that I would frequently get challenged when I was at ed school was, okay, well, what's the alternative? You don't send kids to school. What is the alternative? Eventually, I'm going to get to the student resistance, but I'm almost there.
Okay, yeah, I'm waiting.
I'm getting back to your original question. So it's like, well, what is the alternative? And it's just like, well, I can provide you with plenty of alternatives, but the rejection of alternatives is not an affirmative defense, of something.
That's a really good point. Yes.
The obligation isn't to, it shouldn't be for me to provide an alternative, given, because I'd say it's like, okay, you have pancreatic cancer. We're going to put some leeches on you and do some bloodletting. And I'd be like, well, leeches and bloodletting, are really not good medicine. Yes, I know hundreds of years ago they were doing this, but it's not good medicine. Really, it's pancreatic cancer. Do you have an alternative? Well, no, I don't have. Pancreatic cancer is something. Well, there really isn't much alternative to right now, but that doesn't justify bloodletting and leeches. And
Right.
so that's the defense of compulsory schooling. It's like, well, what's the alternative? But the history of compulsory schooling, this is another thing, that comes out in ed school. It's the history of reform movements that have
Yeah.
failed. It's history, every single thing, No Child Left Behind, and Reach for whatever that under was Obama, and
Mhm.
each one is something new that's put out, and the people who there was some new one that was put out while I was there, and it was, and as much as my classmates wanted to embrace the model, though by the end of the year many of them did come to my line of thinking. I did get a lot of converts.
Good for you.
Very satisfying and
Right.
amusing. But the the people who were creating these reforms, really believed in them, and it was then that was the epiphany moment for my classmates. Was like, no, this is not going to work.
Right.
Um, but so this is where resistance comes in, and resistance is necessary because it's the fact that the reforms aren't going to work, and the environment itself is abusive, and the just providing the student resistance, the thing about it, and it was something I wish I had when when I was in school, was something to this effect. It has very little to do with actually doing anything in the book. It's just that you have it in there, and
Hmm.
the book itself exists to assist with coping mechanisms, because that is, at the end of the day, if you can't get out of that environment, the thing that will keep you sane is your capacity to cope.
Hmm.
And if maybe not today, but tomorrow I'm going to do, whatever X, Y, and Z that is in this that's really
Right.
going to stick it to these people. And whether you ever actually do them or not, um, you feel a little better. You have some sense of agency. There is something I can do, because when you're deprived of agency and you think you're helpless,
Hmm.
that is where your world crumbles, and that is where everything gets that much harder. So I would say the essence of the book is just that.
Hmm.
Idealistically, if everyone did these things, could it take down the institution? Yeah, I'd like to think it could. That one could make the institution so toxic that, because it's not just about what kids can do. It's about taking their ire out on all the people that support, and institutions that support schooling. If you're providing the C grade food, that is, if you're the same entity that provides, food for prisons, and you're providing the same quality of food,
Hmm.
at the school meal, and now you're being subject to all sorts of derision on social media, and it's destroying your reputation, because
Hmm.
kids are very good at social media and can effectively do this, and they're calling in the board of health, and now you're subjected to all these things. Maybe you'll rethink, working at schools, and now suddenly, if they can't get meal programs at schools, yeah, they might adapt and say, okay, we just, people have to bring food into schools. Um, but if more and more people, it becomes toxic to the architects that design prisons, are the same architects that are designing public schools.
Yeah, you
Uh,
make that point very well in War on Kids.
yeah, again, this is an environment. This is a place where kids can shine, where they can anonymously, or even not anonymously, critique these engineering firms and architects and stuff, and just sink their reputations. And they're just like, hell, I'm not gonna, I don't want to touch this. There's real consequences to me. But those are the ancillary, players. But that's my point, is that it can go that far. But communities are vulnerable too, because the real estate prices are affected by the perception of how good the school systems are. And kids can have certainly advertised how bad their schools are, and affect property values. So in addition to the different targets of obvious targets of the teachers, to make the environment so toxic that they don't want to be in schooling, they don't want to be teaching, create and the principals, where enough kids are doing this, enough people are making it such that someone who really wants to who is sincere and wants to work with kids is going to have to find another way to do it that doesn't involve an environment that is that is abusive. I know at least there was Morgan Emmerich, for instance, was one teacher I talked to, who now has his own progressive, or I don't know if progressive is the best word anymore. It used to be a word that positive connotations. Now it's fraught with
independent school.
Yeah. So he's got his own school that he set up, because he just couldn't take how that he was part of an environment that was so destructive. And I think the moment that came to him where was he, there was some student had some really bad stuff that was going on at home, and a teacher came up to him and showed genuine affection, just support, put his arm around the kid, and all of this was great. But he was like, wow, I've never seen this happen in school before, where there's been sincere concern, that's led to this moment of human outreach. And I don't want to be part of a system where this is not the norm. I came because and many teachers get into teaching because they really want to help kids. They like being around kids, and it's the system that interferes with that. And same with the a lot of the administrators too. A lot of them really want to make a positive change, and it's the problem is the system. And that's one of the problems with school also, is that there's this perception. It's like, oh, there's a problem with your school. Is the problem the parents? Is the problem the kids? Is it the administrators? Is it the teachers? Those are always the targets.
Right.
Kids usually number one, but after the kids, all these other people, entities are blamed, and fingers are pointed, and it's got to be one of those four things. And it's like, no. It's the institution. Yeah, there's problematic. You can always find some teachers that are there for whatever other reason, and it's easy to find bad actors among all those. But it's the system, not the participants. They're all subjects to something that is unworkable. And so the handbook is there.
Oh.
Theoretically, it done in mass, it could take it down. But even if nothing is employed in the book, it's empowering and provides coping skills.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you're not aware of any students who've actually put this into action and gotten back to you and say thank you or something?
Yeah, sometimes there are, there's been some outreach. There's been some things over the years where
that must be gratifying.
Have reached out, and I have gotten thanked in various ways for some of the things. It's tough. It's tough in that environment, and it's tough. And one of the things I acknowledge in the book is how hard it is for school students to organize, and so I. And so I stress that, and I tried to create it such that these are things that a single individual, can and should do, and that things usually will not go well for the student if they try to organize, because someone will leak out that they're doing this, and they'll get in trouble. There'll be one person, I'll take who's really excited or proud of what they've done, and they'll blab, and everyone will go down with them. It's just it's hard not to want to take pride in, in something that you've done that
Right.
has some measurable effect against someone who's abusing you, or a system that's abusing you.
Mhm.
Uh, so I really am mindful of that, and mindful that if anything done in the book needs to be done, with an understanding that you will not get credit for anything, and that you cannot share this, or you should not, if for
Right.
your own good, even regardless of everything's legal, and everything is uh, nonviolent, and all. It doesn't matter to a fascist system. They do not care. You will get punished for doing things
Oh
that are
yeah.
within your rights to do.
Mhm.
Uh, so
Mhm.
so
Yeah.
that's
Right. Well, two things I've been thinking about as we've been talking. The compulsory issue is so true. I mean, and we really dismiss it, but it also has the effect of, as you've noted, that it acclimates you to doing mindless things just because you're ordered to do them. And so for me, yeah, and here's the hopeful thing. Yeah, I studied Spanish and didn't, couldn't speak it and stuff. But you know what? I've been to Mexico 3 times now in the last couple of years, and I want to learn Spanish. So I'm actively looking for tutors and classes right now. I mean, this idea that if you don't learn it, then you're never going to learn it, and I didn't want to learn it because I couldn't see any point. Where I grew up, everyone was speaking Italian. And there was no Italian offered in high school. I would have gone right into the Italian class. So, but that's it. So it's this idea that school is like this one-shot opportunity to learn what's important is crazy. And then the other point I want to make is, well, it's actually going to be a question, is that what about business? Business is complaining that they don't have employees that know how to work together as teams and stuff, and that we need more people who could think for themselves, and and meanwhile they're supporting a school system that creates a dependency and this false sense of knowledge through these degrees that don't necessarily connect to people's lives and actions.
well. There's two things I like to address. At first, that you're, I the you said how everyone in your community was speaking Italian, and how great it
Mhm.
would be. It would be great to learn Italian, but the problem, and it's a good thing you didn't learn it in that environment, because then
Right.
you wouldn't want to learn Italian. And the reason is because you wouldn't be organically learning Italian. First, you wouldn't be learning the Italian that you want to speak, which would be conversational Italian. You'd be learning, a type of Italian where the frequently used vernacular isn't present, because it has to be sanitized for that environment. And second, you wouldn't your desire to learn Italian would wane profoundly, because you'd be graded on your
Exactly.
Italian,
Yeah.
and suddenly it would cease to
Right.
be your own impetus. It would be, you'd have to read books in Italian that are dry and boring, that you don't want to read, that are just be like, Jesus, this book is awful. Why can't I read a book that, in Italian, that
Mhm.
actually means something to me? And then maybe your teacher, if you went and it was a, teacher who was sympathetic, says, okay, fine, I'll let you read that book, because you've shown some real aptitude, but you're going to have to write a paper on that book. And then I'm going to grade you on that paper.
Mhm.
And these
Right.
are the questions you're going to have to answer about that book that you want to read. And I was like, I don't want to read that book anymore. Now, you'll be robbed of anything that you wanted
Yeah.
to do there, based on how, how all that goes down.
Right.
Um, but business is just bought into the lie, and
Mhm.
it's funny. So while I was at ed school, there was an opportunity to sort of pitch various models of new ideas and stuff, and meet someone, and I was came in with this, what I thought was a great idea, which was a partnership of where um, uh, I don't want to say students because they wouldn't necessarily be in compulsory schooling, but where people could fulfill, achieve skills that that would be interested in, that businesses would care about,
Mhm.
capacity to, to work in groups and, coming up with creative ideas, literacy, sincere
Right.
literacy, and to have them, to have an entity that would sign off and verify that this portfolio that a student has presented and whatever direct interaction that these that this independent entity, business of sorts, would have an authorizing, approving, and certifying, basically certification
Mhm.
uh, of a student's skills, such that this is not a diploma, because a diploma
Mhm.
means you can get a diploma from an Ivy League school, and a business will not really know if what skills that you actually
Right,
have,
right.
other than the capacity to get this diploma. That's all a diploma says, is that is that whatever,
You made
nothing
it.
more. It doesn't verify your whatever basic skills, and there's certainly all sorts of efforts and movements to strip it from having any meaning, um, in the name of equity. But the uh, but a certification from an entity, that whose reputation is dependent on, averring that you have whatever different skill, that and you can have a list of 100, and then there'd be a partnership. Businesses would go, oh, okay, this person I'd like to hire because this independent entity has certified. Um, yeah, business. I think there's a learned helplessness to business. They just kind of accept, well, I'll roll the dice, and I'll kind of assume that the more prestigious schools,
Mhm.
are have done the selection process for me, and that there's a greater likelihood that they will have these skills,
Mhm.
uh, even though there's increasingly less and less likely to have them. So it's just, yeah, businesses have not been creative. It's not something they've wanted to take on. Perhaps it has to do with the failure of the school reform movement, that they just know, I'm not going to step in there. I clearly don't have the capacity. I'm just going to trust their expertise in being able to sort. That was one of Gatto's big things. If you ask Gatto one thing that schools did more than anything, he'd said their sorting mechanisms.
Right.
Uh,
There's a book, I've mentioned this to you, and I didn't bring it down here with me. It's up in my office, but it came out this year, called Raised to Obey. It's by Agustina Paglayan. I'll put it at the end of this, the reference. But she studies, she's Argentinian, and she was studying the compulsory school, how that arrived in Argentina. And now in this book looks at how it started around the world, and using school records to show when they started tallying all this information, So she has it from Asia to, all around the world. Fascinating. And the long and short of it is, as you've mentioned a couple of times, um, school is built to make people obey authority. That's the basic concept. And she shows that, like, compulsory schooling was like demanded in various kingdoms and other things, largely to prevent social unrest. And yeah, and the whole, and then like 100 years after that, they add in the idea that it's to make a living. Show you how, and then how they keep adding justifications, and as we talked about different reform movements. Oh, schools to help you become a good thinker. Oh, schools to help you become a great scientist, or have job skills. But basically it's to make you obey, because as you've noted, like, the form of school is the prison. And so it was fascinating to me, and I'm still like cogitating about all the data in this book about how, like, I mean, every like 30, 40 years, the mission of school seems to change, or the justification for forcing kids. But the other thing is, the time in school increases. you know? I mean, and meanwhile, we're facing a world where the time of work is decreasing. We're actually working slightly less hours because of automation and who knows what AI is going to bring. But the number of
And there's the 4 day a week work movement.
Right, right. But meanwhile, school hours have increased dramatically, and it's like, so there's less work, but more school. So it's like, does anyone see this trend that's happening as we move forward?
Well, the theory is, that more schooling leads to, more achievement, and because
Mhm.
the achievement is by all metrics and evidence that the system itself, has created, is very ineffective. They do test, they're constantly, testing kids on their math and literacy skills, and they see how poor it is, and then they keep lowering the bar on the test. They keep making the test easier, and the kids keep doing, they're still doing poorly. So, what's the solution? Well, more of what doesn't work,
That's right.
because we're fresh out of ideas. You
And also
know,
that whole put their nose to the grindstone idea. I mean, that's the way you teach
I, I
people.
I'm, I'm I'm a bit, I'd have to read the book, but
Mhm.
I'm mildly skeptical of the hypothesis that
I'm
that,
summarizing
that, that,
it
that,
very.
that schools were created to to keep the population down. I like I said, I have to see the book, but
Yeah, it's very interesting because I didn't realize that there were schools
I think a
deployed.
lot of bad ideas arise organically, and I think the worst ideas arise out of good intentions. Um, and
Mhm.
I think that that's the case with compulsory schooling. I don't think it was instituted for nefarious reasons in the United States anyway. And I think that's the problem. I think if it was instituted for nefarious reasons, it would be easier uh, just to get rid of it. But
Right.
the fact that it's
Right.
with no, it's here to help you, and those are always the worst.
Yeah, that's right.
There was some quote by C.S. Lewis, which I'm trying to remember, but it's something about a system that was designed, to help. Uh, an autocratic system that was designed to help is the worst of all, or something to that
Right.
effect. I have to find the quote because it's
Right.
very good, but it sums up schooling, perfectly. And I know that there's a lot of people like Gatto who just, when you know too much on a subject, you start seeing all sorts of connections,
Mhm.
and it's almost like a form of paranoia. But I see paranoia as a heightened state of awareness.
Mhm.
Like wolves and cats are paranoid all the time because they have the appearance of paranoid because they're always have the state of
Right.
defense. If there's a predator, they're the first to run. But if a twig breaks or something, they'll perk up. It's like, it's a twig. You're paranoid. And that's kind of, so if as you become really heightened aware, you start seeing connections, and those connections aren't always there. And I think that or aren't there, willfully or intentionally or necessarily, of a twig isn't a threat,
Right.
and it's easy to start seeing these connections. And I think that's kind of what happened with 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 some people who really, know an awful lot about the history of schooling.
Right.
Uh, that they'll see a connection that isn't necessarily, or there'll be a connection and they'll take it a little too far.
Mhm.
Uh, the people who were involved with importing uh, compulsory schooling, um, Gatto will break down and say, "Look, these are the captains of industry. They needed workers, and this is why all this was done." And it's like, yeah, well, the captains of industry sometimes, did a lot of unsavory things to get where they are, and then they feel guilty about it and want to make it back, to society and try to do something good, and don't necessarily have a nefarious intent. They just,
Mhm.
are doing, something inappropriate, but they think they're doing good.
Right.
Uh,
Mhm. Wow. Well, Kevin, we've we've spoken for an hour, and I could go on again, but we should do this again. We'll talk some more sometime. But I
yeah.
really appreciate your time today and your insights, and thanks so much. And I'm gonna at the end of this, put links to the book and the movie and the Born to Obey book that I was mentioning.
Well, I really appreciate this opportunity, and it's a lot of fun talking, and it's a real honor to be given, a forum and a platform from someone who is so knowledgeable and involved with the education reform movement. So I really
Thank
appreciate you reaching
thank
out
you.
and giving me the opportunity
All
to
right. Well,
share,
I look forward to
whatever
doing it again, Kev.
insight.
All right. Take care.